All right, well, good morning, everybody, to the 2024 Fantasy Football Sunday here at the Fantasy Football Expo. Thank you all for coming. As you can see, we always do this. We call it the pregame event. We also call it the Mount Rushmore of fantasy football because these folks are it. They are the biggest names in the industry, and we're very honored and happy to have them here. So I'm just going to go down the line here. Jeff Ratcliffe, FTN, Marcas Grant, NFL.com, Bob Harris, FootballGuys, Pat Daugherty, NBC Sports, Jim Coventry, Rotowire, and JJ Zachariason from Lake Round QB. Give them all a round of applause for being here. We're very honored to have them. All right, so our idea here is basically I'm going to ask them some questions, pretty typical ones, but I just want to kind of have them share some of their thoughts and ideas for this year's fantasy season. So, and then what I really want it to be is you guys asking them questions. So we will get to that. But gentlemen, again, thank you for being here. Jeff, we'll start with you. Obviously, there's always that one player that you have to have, or you seem to draft a lot, even though you don't think you have to have them. I certainly have many of those as well. Talk about that one guy that you just feel like this is the year, you got to get him. Who's that going to be?
I'm literally the worst person to ask this question to, because there is no one player.
All right, well,
the players that I want
that's a fair answer.
Is whoever's positioned right on my draft board, right? So we set up before the draft, we prepare, we know the strategies, we know the players, and we know the profiles of the players. That is incredibly important, right? If you can't handle Gabe Davis, like that style of player, don't draft him, right? But otherwise, no, there's no one player. I think that can be really detrimental to a lot of people as well, because if you do have that one player, I'm going to guarantee that you draft that player ahead of where he should be, right? So you're overpaying. And, look, my Starbucks reference here, I got to do the annual Starbucks reference. When you go into Starbucks, whatever this was, $3 or whatever, you don't go, oh, no, I'm going to give you 4, right? You're not going to pay more. But when you reach in a draft, you are paying more than you should for that particular player. So, no, I don't have... Short answer, I don't have one player.
And that's a great answer because, again, it makes a lot of sense. So, Marcus, we'll hand it to you. Do you have a player, or do you take Jeff Ratcliffe's idea?
No, you're really, by the letter of the law, like, Jeff is absolutely right? But in the interest of answering the question and, like, having this thing be fun, I do feel like because we're up here, one of us is obligated to mention Kyle Pitts. I know a lot of folks are like, hey man, this is the year I'm back in on Kyle Pitts. I'm not back in on Kyle Pitts because I never left. This is sort of the year that I think this is it. Either it happens this year or it never happens for him, right? Like, he got the quarterback upgrade in Kirk Cousins. He no longer has a coach who's going to galaxy brain it, right? Like, I feel like few things brought the fantasy community together more than Arthur Smith letting Michael Pruitt throw to Jonnu Smith, like, at the goal line. Like, what are you doing, right? That was like, we all rose up as one to, like, band together and be like, what the hell is happening? So he no longer has that. He's apparently fully healthy for the first time in his career. So this is the year where a perfect storm of upside has come together. So, I've been on the, like, Kyle Pitts is really talented, it's gonna happen, it's gonna come together. If it does not happen, I will give you all the change in my pocket right now. I have no change in my pocket. But the point is, like, this is it. So, if the answer to your question, really, as I ramble along, is I'm still believing that this is the year Kyle Pitts finally puts it together. If it doesn't happen, I will shut up about it, for real.
I love it. Bob Harris.
So, let me do the stipulation. Jeff is right, but also, in a vacuum, Jeff is right. We don't live or draft in a vacuum. We're people, and we have emotions, we like players, we get a little overhyped on them. Every year, I like somebody way more than I should. Last year was Anthony Richardson. My unrequited love for him still stands, but he's more expensive this year. So if I want that $1 million lottery ticket upside at a more reasonable price, for me this year it's going to be Jaden Daniels. Like quarterback 11-ish. And I can take this chance, and it is a chance, right? But you can take it because of the array of quarterbacks available after him that are proven producers at much cheaper prices. Quarterback is a position you can take a risk because there is that entire pool of players who can save your bacon if your guy falls short. I don't think he will. These running quarterbacks, we all know this. Running quarterbacks are the ones that will win you leagues, except Jordan Love would like me to think otherwise last year. But that's my guy, Jaden Daniels this year. He is the nail, and I am the hammer.
Pat.
Let me begin by saying Jeff is so wrong. So wrong. Where irrationality is half the fun of fantasy football. And no, he is very right, but I would be lying if I said I didn't succumb to emotional drafting fairly often. And I've kind of had the reverse experience with this player where I set out like February or March. I thought a clear, maybe like the clearest fade for me all year was going to be Devin Achane. Like, it's just no way, like, obviously he's not going to average 10 yards per touch again. I don't like that he lived up to his pre-draft billing of maybe being undersized and injury prone, and of course got hurt several times as a rookie. But then I saw his ADP, which was not really steamed in my opinion, like late second round, third round, going in an area of the board where there's just not a lot of that home run upside. There's just not a lot of that home run upside at running back beyond like the big three, and of course there is, we just don't quite know where it is. But Devin Achane, I just feel like man, like I thought his ADP would be higher, but the risk is very real, but the reward is so real. I think Raheem Mostert, back-to-back years down the stretch, he actually stayed healthy. Really happy that he stayed healthy, but kind of was running out of steam on the stretch run, especially last year. And I'm just all in on the risk, but also the reward with Devin Achane.
All right, Jim Coventry.
So after the fourth round of drafts, we start looking at players. And by the way, Jeff is right. I won't buy a Starbucks now, but anyway, thanks, Jeff. Now, that said, so after the fourth round or so, we're starting to look for players, and we know that the pool's thinning a little bit. We have good floor players, but we want that one player that maybe can go beyond that. And over the course of the years, Chris Godwin, he's had some injuries that have held him back. He only has one really great season, the 1,300-yard season. That was a while back. But what I like now is last year he was playing too much on the outside. And this year, Liam Cohen comes in to coach the offense. And Cohen worked with Sean McVay. And I know a couple things about Sean McVay, we all do, and we know how well he tightens his formations, he uses receivers to block, but he also schemes the heck open out of them. Players like Cooper Kupp, maybe Puka Nacua. And when we're looking at Chris Godwin, and Cohen's already said, we're moving Godwin back into the slot. And Chris Godwin's an elite slot receiver. Now, you may think of Baker Mayfield. You might be like, well, not so good. But remember, 2 healthy seasons with Baker and Jarvis Landry together. Landry averaged about 974 yards, give or take a couple, and it was Jarvis Landry, good player, but not Chris Godwin. But if Chris Godwin in this Liam Cohen offense is utilized any way that those Rams receivers have been used, he is far more athletic, far more explosive, and he could come up with the mother of all seasons if the stars align right, and I know his floor is good.
JJ.
Jeff is right, One of the things that I've talked about a lot, on my show over the last decade, basically, is this idea of ambiguous backfields, which, a lot of times people hate uncertainty in their drafts. They're like, I'm not going to draft this guy out of this backfield because he has a backfield mate that's also being drafted, let's say in the middle rounds. Oftentimes, that's where value really comes from, because those guys in these ambiguous backfields will emerge based on talent. One of the other guys will get hurt, and then that guy obviously has that contingent upside of if that goes on. There are a lot of ambiguous backfields this year, whether you're looking at Pittsburgh or Tennessee, but the one that I really like to target is the one in Cincinnati. And one of the backs that I think hits a lot of the market trends that I've researched and such. You want pass catchers, you want younger guys. He's getting a lot of steam right now too. Chase Brown. I think a lot of people sort of have typecasted him as a smaller back who's not able to carry a huge workload. Look at his college resume. Look what he did his final year. The dude touched the ball 350 times. He can manage a big workload if it comes to that. I do think that Zach Moss will be involved, likely be an early down guy, at least to start the season, probably the goal line guy. But even if Chase Brown sees 30 to 40% into that, even half of the goal line touches, all of a sudden it's very easy to see a path for him to be a top 20 running back, especially in home leagues. In the best ball streets, he's definitely climbing, and you're seeing his ADP rise quite a bit over the last month. But in your home leagues and such, you're going to get a nice discount on Brown. I think he's a really great pick right now.
All right. Good job, guys. Thank you so much for that. All right, JJ, we're going to start with you so that Jeff doesn't start any more controversies. Let's go the opposite way. What is that one player, ADP-wise, that you look and he's sitting there and you're like, no, I can't do it. and it happens all the time. There's
Yeah.
always one of those as well. Talk about that player for you this year.
Yeah, I think this might be a little controversial because I know that there might be people on the panel that completely disagree with me. But there's this idea out there that's been out there for a while called the running back dead zone, where it's this area of the draft where not only do running backs not hit at a very strong rate, but the wide receivers and now quarterbacks and tight ends hit at a stronger rate. And obviously running backs are going later and later in drafts these days. But even when you look at the position itself and you look at RB2s into that RB3 range in 12-team leagues, those guys are not hitting at that substantially better of a rate than RB4s. So it's really not that worthwhile to go after a lot of those types of players. With that being said, I think the most quintessential running back dead zone running back this year is Zamir White. And I know that some people are going to disagree with me strongly because they look at that backfield and they say, who else is going to touch the ball in that backfield? If you have to use that as an argument for a player, that's usually a bad thing. Look at what happened with Mike Davis just a handful of years ago in Atlanta, and then the Cordell Patterson train comes out of nowhere and steals a lot of touches out of that backfield. It happens every single year. Zamir White, someone who I don't think is a bad player per se, I definitely think he can be an early down bruiser. You look at the dude, he is freakishly massive and frightening. If you were on the opposing defense. But my worry about him is twofold. The offense shouldn't be very strong. I think they're going to run at a pretty slow pace and not run many plays. But then on top of that, he hasn't been a pass catcher ever. I mean, you can go back all the way throughout college at Georgia. He was not a pass catcher. You look at what he did during his first 2 years in the NFL, wasn't a pass catcher. People will look at what happened down the stretch last year in the final month of the season and say, that's the Zamir White that I'm drafting. He had a sub 10% target share during that stretch. He was never a pass catcher. He's not been a pass catcher. So my fear with him, they go out and they draft Dylan Laube, who is a quintessential pass catcher. Like, that is his role. That's what his role is going to be in the NFL. I think that all signs point to the fact that he's probably just going to be an early down bruiser, and I don't want an early down bruiser in what's projected to be a pretty bad offense.
So we get league winner one year, and next year we got to wonder what the player I'm going to talk about is Kyren Williams. Kyren Williams is a rookie, missed 7 games to start the season. Durability is an issue. Last year missed a handful of games, and we don't talk about the NFL playoff game when he broke his hand. Obviously, that could have been any week, and anybody could break their hand, but the injury history is there. But the bigger issue is this. I referenced Sean McVay when I talked earlier. Well, McVay's a genius. He's ahead of his time. Last year, he realized that defenses were getting better at stopping zone runs with light boxes. They were shooting gaps very well. But what McVay was ahead of the curve on, they were running what we call the duo concept, downhill. Actually, they were interior 3 linemen, weighed over 1,000 pounds. They were perfectly set up for him. So McVay got Kyren Williams going right away, downhill. Does that mean Williams is a great runner? Perform for fantasy, yes. But here's the question. Durability, and then they draft Blake Corum. If Blake Corum, in my mind, has a really good chance of being a better running back than Kyren Williams, and if that is the case, and we already know Williams has injury history, and McVay will likely protect Williams. Williams is getting drafted squarely inside the top 10 running backs. I don't think the volume's going to be there. He'll get production, but not to that level. I think it's an extreme overpay. And if Corum is flat out a better player, it could really be this case where it ends up being 60-40 in favor of Corum, and you just use a top 10 running back pick on him. So I'm out.
Jim, you're not supposed to talk about real football, by the way. Real football concepts. I don't know what any of that means. But Kyren, by the way, I didn't like last week. They were talking about, we're going to do whatever it takes to keep me fresh. Like, I'm all on board with Coach's plan. I was like, oh, yikes. That's not good. Someone I had on essentially every team last year was Tank Dell. And I still love Tank Dell. And his upside, not like I can really argue with Tank Dell's upside, but Nico Collins, of course, 3rd-year breakout, got paid. Steph Diggs, borderline Hall of Fame career. They go out and acquire him. Arguably, he's not in his prime, but I wouldn't say he's past his prime. And, I was just saying, Tank Dell won't be in 2 receiver sets. They'll probably play mostly 3 receiver sets this year. So I don't even know how big of a concern that is, but I think he is the clear number 3 receiver. It was a fluke play where he got hurt. But I do not like when, as rookies, players live up to like their negative pre-draft billing. And here's another guy like, listen, Tank's undersized. He could get hurt. It's a rough and tumble league. He should not have been blocking on that play. That was totally idiotic. So that was, a fluke play, but I did not like that. He proved that he is small, and I could miss the boat, but he's going a lot of times as a wide receiver 2 still, like a back end wide receiver 2, but whereas I'm all in on the Devin Achane risk for some reason, I'm all out on the Tank Dell risk this year.
So JJ is wrong. Jim is way over my head. That's never mind. No, so like I got to stay on brand here. Old, mean, cheap. Check that out. I'm in the right mindset. I don't want to pay for historic. 105 catches, 1,400 yards. Puka Nacua is coming off a historic rookie season, and you're paying for it. And and I'm not against people doing that. I'm probably not. I'm probably going to wait until the 3-4 turn and draft Cooper Kupp because the old portion of the old mean cheap. But I think the opportunity cost. There are other players there that I feel might be in line for historic seasons, but aren't coming off historic seasons, who are priced in that same range. I just think we overpaid for that. Marcus loves it when I say this. Don't draft last year's best team, right? And so, I mean, it's natural to do that, and that doesn't mean a lot of last year's best players aren't going to be this year's best players. But buy them at the right price, and I don't know that Puka's at the right price right now. Although the recent injury, I think, put a little focus on this, and I think people are like, oh, maybe I was going a little overboard on this, and maybe he'll drop down a little bit. If he does, I'll go all after that.
Well, first of all, in the Kings Classic, in the Snake, I took Kyron Williams, and in the auction, I took Puka Nacua. So I don't love the fact that you guys have both pointed out those two guys like in this panel right now. I am worried about Jahmyr Gibbs where he is going, and and Pat talked about Achane and the fact that he's got Raheem Mostert. He's obviously a very explosive guy and a good offense, but he does have backfield competition, and so I think because of that, you've seen that ADP fall down to the 3rd round. We somehow haven't come to that same conclusion with Jahmyr Gibbs, where yes, he's an explosive back and a good offense, but David Montgomery still walks the earth. And I know that's not a really sexy name, but he's a guy who's very consistent. He's on the field, he makes plays, he's going to get opportunities in that offense, but for whatever reason, we're still drafting Jahmyr Gibbs in the 1st round. And it feels like that is the absolute ceiling for him. And I love him, I think he's a great player. But again, it's Jeff's Starbucks analogy. Like I feel like we're paying $5 for a coffee that's $3 for Jahmyr Gibbs. So I have not drafted much of him just because I would rather wait a couple rounds. If I want a part of that Detroit backfield, I'll wait a couple rounds to get David Montgomery, who I think gives you really good production at a much nicer draft price.
I want to start out by saying I agree that I'm right. You guys took some good ones. The Zamir White point. They don't have a quarterback. Like, they do. There is no quarterback for the Raiders. That's a problem. You need a quarterback in the NFL. They have 2 backups. It's not bad to be a backup, but if you're using a backup as your starter, you have a major issue on your hands. But to the point of Tank Dell, last year I had a take that did not go over very well with a lot of people. It was Calvin Ridley. And I even was at this panel last year, and I said, I do not understand why Calvin Ridley is being overdrafted. And of course he blew up in week 1. That was really awesome. My Twitter was great that day. But then he proceeded to kind of be the Calvin Ridley that I expected him to be. And it wasn't wrong, like he was a top 30 player, but we were drafting him at wide receiver 15. This year, I love where Calvin Ridley's going, by the way, this year. But the player who kind of stands out to me isn't Tank Dell, it's Nico Collins. And that is not a knock on Nico Collins. He averaged over 3 yards per route run last year. That is, you walk amongst the gods with that number. 5 times in the last 5 years, 2 of them Tyreek, Cooper Kupp, Brandon Ayuk, and Nico Collins accomplished that feat over the course of the season. It's epic. But there's one football in Houston, and it's not just the 3 receivers. You have Joe Mixon, who's capable of catching the ball out of the backfield. You have a pass-catching tight end as well. There is one football, and I don't see them passing the ball 790 times. So where we're drafting Nico Collins as like wide receiver 12, 13, 14 feels quite aggressive. Probably should be more like wide receiver 20-ish, somewhere in that range. And I think when we draft the player at his ceiling, which that's about his ceiling, we're inevitably setting ourselves up for disappointment. Because most players just don't reach their ceiling in a given season, right? And I see that happening this year with Nico, unfortunately, and I love him as a player, but the problem is that ball's going to get distributed around.
Yeah, good stuff. All right, thanks, guys. All right, so last question before we go to the audience. Who is a player that you think their ADP is way far off? Preferably, it's too low and you're drafting them, you're getting they're just a great value, And do you really see that? But the rest of the market is kind of, obviously the ADP is being set by that, and you just feel like it's just way off. That player should be much higher, and why?
I could go in a
I
couple
got
of
him.
rounds here. See what I did there? Rounds, right? No. So maybe this one I think is to tie into some of the stuff we were talking about. Raheem Mostert is going to. I like Achane a lot, but Mostert, he had 21 touchdowns. I know we're going to point to the age, of course, but it's kind of, he was on the practice squad for all those years. He doesn't have the wear and tear of a typical 32-year-old running back, right? And yet you're getting him several rounds after Achane. And the problem is the league will tell us stuff. If we're listening, they will tell us. They may not directly tell us exactly the touch shares, etc. But when Mike McDaniel says, yeah, we have a group that's led by Raheem Mostert, why are we not paying attention to that, right? So let's keep this our secret. I like getting Raheem Mostert in like the 8th or 9th rounds, right? But I do think he's going a little too low.
So I had two names in my mental queue, and you took Raheem Mostert. So I'm going to go to the other name I had in my mental queue, and that's Deontay Johnson. I feel like Deontay Johnson is every fantasy analyst's like favorite wide receiver. Like we sit and we watch him, we're like, this dude's a technician running routes, he gets open, he gets targets, and then we get to this part of the year and like more casual fans jump in, they start looking at his numbers and they're like, look at his numbers and it's oatmeal, man. Like, here's the thing about oatmeal. It's healthy, it's filling, but you don't go out to breakfast with your friends and family, you're like, give me some of that oatmeal. Like, that's what his numbers look like. But we're like, everything about Deontay is great. Yes, he doesn't have a huge yardage season, he doesn't have a huge touchdown season, but now he's in Carolina where, I don't know about y'all, but I remember every week last year, you would see these like all 22 shots of the Panthers offense, like freeze framed, and you're like, well, where's Bryce Young gonna go with the football? Because nobody could get open. I mean, there was a reason Adam Thielen blew us away in the first half of the year because he was the one guy who could kind of get open. Now they've got Deontay, who's gonna be that guy, who's gonna be that target monster. But I just think everybody sort of looks at the numbers and they're like, well, he's never had a big yardage season, he's never had a big touchdown season. Why am I investing in him? And I just look at it as like, he's going to be a target magnet down there in Carolina, and I don't understand why we haven't quite jumped on board yet.
And the coach told us this. Dave Canales told us this. Like, again, the league will tell us stuff if we're listening.
So since Jeff and Marcus took the prize picks here, I'm going to start this by saying you can add risk to your roster without having a risky roster, right? You have to manage that. Hopefully you've made really wise decisions earlier in your draft so you can maybe take some chances on some super high upside players later. Think of a wide receiver who's averaged 15 yards a catch over his career as 14th in the league among qualified players. He had a stretch as a rookie, 7 touchdowns in 4 games. He had a nice stretch last year with 4 touchdowns over 3 games. His name is Christian Watson. Stop. I know what you're thinking. He's always hurt. I know he's always hurt. I know that, and if you follow my work, you know I'm injury agnostic. Also, I'm not stupid. There's a difference between chronically injured, bad luck guys and chronic injuries. And there's no doubt Watson has had chronic hamstring issues. But you know what? I believe the scientists. I trust them. They say they fixed that problem. Also, he's in the 9th round. If I can get a wide receiver 4 that potentially could be a difference-making player on his own team and deliver possibly wide receiver 1 numbers if he can put a full season together, I don't feel like that's an undue risk. That's what I'm doing.
Christian Watson did quite literally go to the lab. And said they fixed it. Jeff, the only thing I'll say is that coaches say a lot of things. They say a lot of things. I don't know why I'm going to say this guy, but I think every draft I've done, I've come away with Tyler Conklin, who, what was it, like 700 yards last year. He's one of the clear top 3 or 4 options for the Jets last year. This year, I think he's one of the clear top 2 or 3, depending on how ready Mike Williams is in week 1, which, as Jeff points out, the Jets coaches are saying he'll be ready for week 1, but I just think a catastrophically thin Jets depth chart, like skill player, they're talking about Xavier Gibson, and Malachi Corley is apparently not having a good training camp. Tyler Conklin, his entire season would have been different last year, but he scored 0 touchdowns I mean, anyone who watches the Jets understands why he scored 0 touchdowns, because he was at quarterback. And I think a team that's really starved for quality targets, you could argue whether or not Tyler Conklin is a quality target. But I think he, as at worst, the number 3, he's probably the number 3 target. Mike Williams seems like he'll be ready for week 1, but in a famously depressed position where after the top 8 or 9 guys, it's a little deeper this year, but the tight end dead zone is very real and very large. And his ADP has never really developed this year. And got a lot of Tyler Conklin.
So you get into the 5th round of your draft, and you are hoping, and there aren't many 1,000-yard receivers each year. You always think there's a ton of them. There aren't that many. And you get in that 5th round, and you're really hoping you can catch fire with one. Well, you actually got a cheat code this year. Amari Cooper's been in Cleveland for 2 years. It's a really sketchy quarterback play. Yet he's averaged 1,200 yards in those 2 years and 7 touchdowns. The other thing is people are like, oh man, he's got Deshaun Watson throwing him the ball. That's a big problem. Maybe not. They played 5 games together last year. In 4 of those games, and only one of them hit double-digit targets. Cooper had 90 yards in 4 of those 5 games with Deshaun Watson. And the team paid Cooper some extra money this year. Clearly have a plan for him. The other thing is, we think of Cleveland as a run-based team. Kevin Stefanski has been very good as a coach of that. But what the organization seemed to do since they brought Watson in, they kind of made it his offense. They go with 3 receiver sets, probably way more than they should. But the one thing is, Watson is decent at locking on his alpha, and Cooper is good at getting open and getting yards after the catch. He proved that on multiple occasions in the last 2 years. So I do think you're in that 5th round. I think the floor is exceptional. And they're 1,200 yards, 2 years running. Definitely roll it again. Amari Cooper's a great play in the 5th round.
Yeah, I love that call. Ken Dorsey there too. There's very offense, pass-heavy offense. I think we're going to see a lot more passes out of Cleveland. So as the late round quarterback, if you will, I guess I'll go with the quarterback here. I think the best value on the board at quarterback by far this year is Kyler Murray. And especially, again, in some of these like the leagues that we did yesterday and stuff, you'll probably see him shoot up the boards more than what you'll see in your home leagues and whatnot. But I'll try to remember the stat while doing research on Kyler this year. So we know that quarterback mobility is ungodly important, at the position of fantasy football. And Kyler Murray, since entering the league, he's been in the league for 5 years. He's he's had at least 4.9 points per game on the ground every single year. So just via his legs only, right? He's done that in 4. He's hit 5 points per game with his legs in 4 of his 5 seasons. Since 2011, we've had 35 quarterbacks hit 300 or more pass attempts, so they were a starter for most of the season, who then hit 5 or more points per game with their legs. Of those 35, the lowest points per game was 17.7. 20 of the 35 ended up scoring 20 points per game, which is by far higher than Kyler Murray's current ADP expectations. So you add the weapons in Arizona, it's Marvin Harrison. I think the wide receivers really come together well in Arizona. You get Marvin Harrison, Michael Wilson on the outside, Greg Dortch, shout out Greg Dortch, in the slot. Trey McBride at tight end. It's a really, really good offense. And Kyler, even last year, stepping in, was a strong fantasy asset on a points per game basis despite coming off this knee injury in a new offense. So I think Kyler could easily, legitimately be a top 3 quarterback this year. And he's being drafted, more in that QB7 range. And I guarantee you there's going to be a lot of drafts where people are turned off because it's Kyler Murray, and they'll draft some of those pocket passers like a Jordan Love or a Dak Prescott over him too.
All right, great stuff, guys. Thank you for that. All right, as I promised, for this last half hour, I want to open up to the crowd here. Who has a question for anybody on the panel at this point? Don't all put your hands up at once. All right.
Hey guys, if you had to choose a running back to take according to their ADP, would it be Devin Singletary or would it be a Zach Moss?
In my opinion, it's Zach Moss. Again, going back, I know that I said Chase Brown earlier, but I love to target those ambiguous backfields, whether you're talking Tennessee, like I think both Tajay Spears and Pollard are pretty good picks this year. With Devin Singletary, I understand that he's someone who could outperform his ADP. If he's like RB32 and he finishes his RB24, I don't think any of us would be shocked if that's his points per game finish. But, it's one of those situations where Singletary's fine, but he's being drafted more or less because there's a lack of competition in that backfield. I don't know if we're going to be extremely bullish on the Giants offense. And don't sleep on guys like Tyrone Tracy or maybe even an Eric Gray in that backfield to steal some touches. I also worry a little bit about down the stretch where the fantasy playoffs happen and where your season matters the most. If the Giants are out of it, they might want to get a guy like Tracy a little bit more run to see what they have out of him out of a day 3 pick. So to me, Singletary is a fine, whatever. I don't think that he's going to totally burn you. I just don't think he could be a league winner, whereas Zach Moss, at least in that offense, potential goal line back. If Chase Brown goes down, then Moss is all of a sudden a bell cow in the Cincinnati offense. I'd rather take that chance because you're really shooting for upside in that area of your draft anyway.
JJ makes an extremely important point with the Giants where it could go sideways extremely early in the season. I mean, they might not even ever really want it to get on the tracks. They might be gunning for a top 5 pick, although teams don't really think that way. The only thing I'll say with Singletary versus Zach Moss is Devin Singletary is the classic running back. Teams never, the past 2 or 3 years, his team has not planned to feature him. Then they always end up featuring him. Once he gets on the field, they cannot get him off the field. Zach Moss was the exact opposite in Buffalo. It finally came together for him a little bit last year in Indianapolis. His second go-around last year was far less impressive than he was in September. JJ, though, made so many good points. That's just the only thing I think of with those 2 players is once Devin Singletary gets an opening, he does not let go.
So I just, since I'll take the other side of JJ's point, I like to chase volume, and the cheaper the volume comes, or anticipated volume, let's put it that way. But also, over the 5 years they've been in the league together, who has more rushing yards and a higher yards per carry, Devin Singletary or Saquon Barkley? It would be Singletary. Evan Neal came off pup today. That's encouraging, but it's mostly about the price. If I can get anticipated volume at a cheap price, I'm probably going to take that. This is a 2-lane highway. Both of these things can be true. JJ's point is perfectly fair, but so is the Singletary. I'm probably more in line with trying to get the volume because I don't want to take zeros any given week. But that's kind of goes back to what I said earlier. How you construct your roster often makes these decisions for you. What did you draft earlier in your draft? What kind of backs do you have? Do you feel like maybe you took someone with an injury risk or a little less certain circumstance and you want someone standing behind you that's got a steadier chance to produce an even keel? Or you have really solid guys up front, maybe you need a home run swing that emerges. That might be how I decided.
And we're seeing conflicting perspectives here. Have you noticed that? If you listen to SiriusXM, the Jeff Ratcliffe Show, 9 to 11 a.m. Eastern, Monday through Friday. But if you listen to the channel all day long, you're going to hear different hosts with different perspectives. And the reality is there's no one right way to play this game. There are a lot of wrong ways, but there's no one right way. There are a lot of great ways to play it. And, Harris makes a great point. JJ makes a great point. Pat is there too. But as the listener or the viewer or the reader, you guys ultimately are the ones who, run your teams. And I think a lot of you guys have been sort of trained, ask a fantasy question, get a fantasy answer, do what that answer is, and then invariably complain when that answer ultimately ends up being wrong. Take the perspectives from everybody, but then establish your own perspective. So you just got great intel on both of those guys, reasons to like both of those guys. Now establish your reasoning based on the info you just got.
All right, good stuff. Anybody else here? Questions?
What's going on, y'all? My name is Brandon. Can y'all hear me? I got a question. So obviously we know Puka Nacua went, I believe, in the 5th round. Is there any day 3 rookie picks that we should maybe keep our eye on? Just maybe they could have another breakout season?
I imagine Jalen Polk is going to walk into some volume. First of all, the New England defense, we hear how much talent they have, and maybe they do. But I still have to think that Bill Belichick was the master at bringing the right players in the right position at the right time and always knowing what the other team is going to do. So maybe the talent is good, but there's nobody walking into that defensive room that's going to have that impact. So I think people are saying this is top 8 defense. I think they're going to be worse, and they're going to have to throw more than they like. We don't know what Drake May is. we know Jacoby Brissett can get the ball to players, and with Jalen Polk being an outside receiver, my assumption is there has to be targets that are just going to go there. And I know the league plays 73% zone, best place to attack is the middle, but you're still going to have outside completions, and I think he's going to be pushed into a volume role, so you get him fairly super late in drafts. So I think he is a guy to keep an eye on. The touchdowns probably won't be high, but you might get catches and yards that go beyond that.
You know, a lot of years there just is no day 3 rookie who becomes like, a receiver especially. I think the best place to look at receiver this year is maybe Troy Franklin. Kind of unfamiliar with what the current narrative is on him though, and there's a reason. We don't maybe know what the reason is necessarily that he fell to the 4th round though when he was expected to go much higher, but very, very depressed receiver depth chart in Denver. Sean Payton is trying to stock the offense with his guys. He did that with Marvin Mims last year, and it did not work. But Troy Franklin's maybe about the highest day 3 skill player you could find, and maybe the best place to look.
I'll give a shout to, well, number one, I like Jalen Polk a lot. I also think Javon Baker is really interesting because he's a guy who fell in the draft mostly because of off-the-field stuff. He's a really, really strong prospect, transferred to a smaller program and was able to thrive in that program because he was kind of buried in the depth chart at Alabama before he transferred. So I like the New England wideouts in general at value. I don't think that they're going to dominate per se. I'll go a day 3 running back, at least, the guy that I just mentioned with the Devin Singletary answer. I like Tyrone Tracy, man. If you look at that backfield, Eric Gray and Devin Singletary are both not size speed freaks. We always want good speed scores, weight adjusted 40 time at the running back position. They were below the 90 mark. 100 is a solid score at speed score. Anything below 90, we rarely see hits out of that score. Now, obviously, Kyron Williams did that last year, but we rarely see like massive hits out of that kind of speed score. It's just a weight adjusted 40 time formula. Devin Singletary, Eric Gray, both below that mark. You look at what Tyrone Tracy brings to the table. He's a converted wide receiver to running back. He played 6 years in college, and that's probably the biggest red flag, is that the dude is older than a lot of people here, and he's a rookie. So that's definitely somewhat of an issue, but he definitely brings something different to the table than those other backs do in terms of explosiveness, and he's a great pass catcher as well. I do a lot of prospecting through data, and one of his comparables out of my model this year was Tony Pollard. He's a very Pollard. I could see a season of Tracy like what we saw with early career Tony Pollard. The difference is that he doesn't have a superstar running back like Tony Pollard did competing for touches. It's Devin Singletary and Eric Gray. So I do like Tyrone Tracy quite a bit.
Yeah, I was gonna say I think receiver is gonna be harder to find, but I think running back you can find some guys. Tracy's one. Ray Davis is another one in Buffalo that I really love. I think the Bills have sort of shown us over the last few years they like James Cook. They don't necessarily love James Cook to the point that they're going to give him all of the work. And so I think Ray Davis is going to get some opportunities. I also think at some point, even though Josh Allen is a big, strong guy, how often do you really want to smash your franchise quarterback into the line over and over and over again, which is where Ray Davis can get some opportunities. So, he's a guy who's a round 4 pick. I think he's a guy who's getting a lot of opportunity there. I would also say maybe a little bit deeper is Kamani Vidal in Los Angeles with the Chargers. Gus Edwards is going to get a ton of work. I think as a fan, I would love to see J.K. Dobbins actually become that guy, but I think realistically, after the injuries he's had, it's kind of a long shot. So Kamani Vidal is that guy who's going to step in, take a lot of those opportunities. We know Harbaugh and Greg Roman want to run the football, so I think Kamani Vidal is a guy who has some chance to get on the field and make some plays for them.
Can I add something real quick to Marcus? I love his point about Ray Davis. Secondary running backs in Buffalo had 16 carries inside the 5-yard line last year. Davis does project to be that downhill guy. And James Cook, I love what Marcus said also. James Cook had a lot of usage last year, and in his last 5 games, he was 2.64 yards per carry. Kind of the classic case. If you work the smaller back too much, you see the back end numbers kind of go down, and clearly you're going to want to get Ray Davis in, so I love that call, Marcus.
Secondary running back needs Latavius Murray too, by the way. It was Latavius Murray, and look at the goal line carries. Latavius Murray was, other than Josh Allen, the goal line back. James Cook is not getting those looks. So somebody else has to get him because Lat Murray isn't there. So that's a good call out.
So Brandon, since nobody else answered your question either, I'm not going to too. Unlike JJ, rookie talk is not a native tongue for me. I have to play catch up after the football season, and I'm still getting there. But I'll go with the day 2 if that's okay. Jalen McMillan in Tampa Bay seems to be a guy that's gaining a lot of steam. Everybody's talking about him. Very talented in Washington, maybe overshadowed by other players and injury issues. So that's a guy I have my eye.
All right. I know you had a question still? Yep. All right.
Morning, guys. The Denver backfield seems a mess. What running back do you see is going to be the long-term option in Denver? Thank you.
I don't know if there's a long-term option there. But the guys that Sean Payton is invested in, the one that stands out to me is Jaleel McLaughlin. I think everyone up here is going to agree. Over the course of his 16 years in New Orleans, there's always been that receiving guy, right? We go back, over the course of time. And I think he sees that in Jaleel McLaughlin. If you listen to people, the drum beats that have been coming from Denver all offseason have varied. The rhythm has changed, right? First it was Javonte Williams doesn't have a chance, and now he's all that and more. And so, but the one steady, the one thing that has not changed is Sean Payton's love for Jaleel McLaughlin. So I think that's a guy. It's going to be a limited role, a secondary role for the most part, but he's capable of a little more, I think. Maybe a little better between the tackles than we want to grant him because he's smaller and seen as a pass catcher. But also those pass catchers have fared really well for Sean Payton.
Yeah, just to add to that, one of the craziest stats that I found in my research this year was when you look at team running back target shares, and you look at all of them since 2011, so that's 32 teams times, 12 years or whatever. If you look at the top 17, Sean Payton-led teams own 8 of the top 7 team running back target shares. So he wasn't even coaching every year during that time frame. He loves targeting running backs. They were the top team last year in running back target share. I don't even think Javonte Williams is that bad of a pick at ADP either, because I think if there is a guy in that backfield who would become a hypothetical bell cow, it would be him more than likely. But I don't think we're going to look at that backfield and say there's going to be a true bell cow. And so McLaughlin's been, he's one of my highest exposed players this year. I love him.
Just to flesh out even further on this depth chart, Samaje Perine might not make this roster. He has no guaranteed money left in his contract, and they drafted a Samaje Perine clone in Audric Estime. So, don't draft Samaje Perine anywhere is the point.
I'd like to take just a second to thank the kids for letting the old guy take that layup.
All right, do we have any other questions?
Hello. I want to talk about garbage time production. I don't hear that term anymore from the industry experts. And is that because the NFL teams have changed the way they end their games? And specifically, to distinguish between like a negative game script, the team has no chance of winning, but they're just trying to get touchdowns or make a respectable score. And I used to target garbage time production receivers, and I've not had luck with that recently. So I guess in a roundabout way, is garbage time production a thing of the past?
I'll take a crack at this one. So what I've noticed last year, remember scoring was super low. All those unders were hitting for betting like at a record level. Well, when you have low scoring, you don't seem to have as many blowouts. So last year was like a case in point where there may not be as much garbage time as usual, but in the past otherwise, it's on a week to week, you can't really predict it, right? It's almost like picking the point spread on games. Sometimes you get teams a 9-point favorite. You project there's going to be garbage time for the team that's a 9-point underdog, but then guess who ends up winning the game? The 9-point underdog. So predicting garbage time is really an exercise of utility. Once in a while we get it, because we see 17-point favorite, which rarely happens. And in those games, sometimes it goes to script, and in those cases. So I think I don't talk about it in advance because I just think predicting it is a very dangerous slope to run.
Yeah, I honestly just think that. I don't know if there we go. All right. I honestly just think there's just the competitive levels between teams now has been so small that even the bad teams, it's rare that you're getting blown out every week, right? Like the Miami Dolphins, I'm going to go out on a limb and say the Miami Dolphins don't have a game where they score 70 points on somebody this year, right? I'm going to take that leap. I just think that, games are generally within one score more often than not. There's a reason that Scott Hansen has made the witching hour a thing on Red Zone, because more often than not, the last 2 minutes of games, like one team usually has the ball within a score with a chance to tie or take the lead late. And I just think that, we do have garbage time games, but even the gap between the best teams and the worst teams on a week-to-week basis just isn't as big as it used to be once upon a time.
One of the things that I've researched garbage time and such, and especially at the quarterback position, but it still applies to wide receivers and stuff. And one of the phrases that I love to use is that it takes a garbage performance to create garbage time, right? In order for a team to be in garbage time, more than likely the first 3.5 quarters, that team's offense wasn't performing very well. And so when we say garbage time, we're only thinking about an eighth of the game, as opposed to the other large portion of the game where those players weren't performing, which created the garbage time in the first place. So those players weren't actually giving you the fantasy production that you think that they were giving you in the first place. So I think part of it too is just naturally the garbage time narrative isn't nearly as real as people generally think.
Jim and JJ both make that important point. But I also think something that's happened with like garbage time and like second half passing is we just kind of took for granted that the passing golden age was going to go on forever. You know, where we had like 5 or 6 Hall of Famers and Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, Drew Brees, Ben Roethlisberger, like all throwing for close to 5,000 yards per season. And a lot of the garbage time heroes were actually like fairly good players. Like Eli Manning was one of the all-time garbage. Blake Bortles. Big Ben was a garbage time legend, and the league has adjusted to where, like when you're in obvious passing situations, they're stopping it much more often in the second half than they had. Where the league finally adjusted, to the non-stop, never-ending passing pyrotechnics, as we've seen, at least for now, scoring has peaked, and that's another reason why. I agree with you. Like, I agree with them. Especially, like, I don't really try to predict garbage time, but I agree that it seemed like, well, man, all right, they're down 17 at halftime. Like, finally, time to cash these Calvin Ridley checks, and then nothing happens. And so I think that there's a variety of reasons for it.
I said earlier, I trust the scientists. I don't know if any scientists are talking about this, so I'll trust the next best thing. That's JJ now that he has glasses.
All right, can we pass the mic here?
Yes, I just have a question about handcuffing with running backs, specifically with Nick Chubb and, I'm sorry, I just went blank. Ford, yes. Okay. Now, if you set your lineup, you already have a couple of starters and you're just in a basic roster league, 2-2-1, is it okay to stack both of them? Like, or if you have your other two, I'm sorry guys, I'm kind of blowing this, but you got me, Jeff?
I have the answer. So when we cuff, that's insurance, right? You want to insure an investment. And usually that is an early round running back. So, we're talking about Kyron Williams and then grabbing Blake Corum. Nick Chubb isn't going as an early round running back right now. He's like RB 35 to 40, typically in that range. And so is Jerome Ford. So I think in that type of situation, you actually have to commit to one of those guys. You have to place your chips on one of those guys, because if you draft them both, you're going to set yourself up when Chubb is eventually healthy for potential decisions every single week. And in fantasy, one of my great secrets is to try and minimize the decisions that I have to make, because the more decisions I have to make, the more decisions I'm going to get wrong. And we all know that, right? You're not going to be right 100% of the time. So when you have two guys in the backfield like that, and that's not the only situation, you could have Javonte Williams and Jaleel McLaughlin or whatever. You're going to have to make those decisions week in and week out, and those can be painful. So I would pick one and then just stick with that one guy.
Yeah, I think that we make, going back to the ambiguous backfield stuff that I was talking about earlier, I've seen so many people, they'll stack like the Tennessee backs or they'll stack the Cincinnati backs. I mean, that's a floor play. Like that's not the ceiling play, because there's still a very real outcome where Tennessee's backfield is just a 50-50 split, and then all of a sudden neither of those guys are worthwhile for your fantasy lineup every week, and now you're screwed out of those two picks. You spent capital on those guys who are no longer going to be starters for your team. What you're doing is you're placing bets on these individual players like a Tajay Spears, like a Tony Pollard. I'd be way more inclined to get a Spears and Chase Brown rather than a Chase Brown and a Zach Moss in the same backfield, because if I hit on one of those guys, that's massive. If I hit on both of those guys, it's game over. I'm winning my league.
Great. All right, do we have another question? Here we go.
Hey everybody. So I got a question on the Jacksonville Jaguar wide receiver group. That's been one of the things that I'm concentrating on. Who's going to be productive? Who's going to be the main number one? They got Brian Thomas, they just got Gabe Davis. You got Ingram in there too. So I just want to see what you guys, response is. Who's going to be productive? Who's going to be consistent? And who's going to come out on top of it?
I think the market's priced about right on this. Christian Kirk is the most trustworthy asset there, right? Assuming he stays healthy. And I'll throw Evan Ingram in there as well. I mean, I think there's distinct roles. Brian Thomas Jr., we don't know, right? And, there's varying reports. Some reports are he's a little slow to catch on. I think he's, the profile and the athleticism and everything seem like maybe he breaks out. I think this goes back to the roster construction. How are you building your roster? If you need a safer play, it's going to be Christian Kirk. If you want to take some chances, it's probably not Gabe Davis, who still is looking for that 50th catch in a season. And maybe he gets it, and when he does, I hope I'm not the guy who paid for it, because I probably overpaid.
A lot of people do not like my Thomas comp. It's Kevin White. Now, I'm not saying Kevin White's career arc, but when you look at it, a one-year wonder, freakish size, athleticism, height, weight, speed guy, right? But 1 year. Now, granted, it was a massive year in the SEC, so we're not going to discount that per se, but we don't know exactly what we're going to get with him. And so if you are going to draft him, exactly to their point, Kirk is going to be steady. You're going to get undulation, obviously we know with Gabe Davis, but I think we're also going to get that with Brian Thomas, so just know what you're signing up for. Like, you could have 3 catches for $120 and 2 touchdowns, and you could have 1 catch for 12 yards. Or the goose egg. That could happen with him, so be prepared.
Other side note to this is, you mentioned Evan Ingram. Evan Ingram's season last year was the latest example of things that have weaponized me and radicalized me against full point PPR. Like, all the catches for less than 900 yards. I have this thing where if your player catches the football and the blue line of scrimmage line is still on the screen, that's a really hard way to live, and that was Evan Ingram last year. So I'm with Bob though. Christian Kirk is the steady, safe play. Brian Thomas is sort of the home run swing. Evan Ingram is hey man, I just need you to get 15 targets somehow today, because ideally you'll turn that into 60 yards and maybe a touchdown.
My concern with Jacksonville, and this could be a wild card, we're not going to know, but Press Taylor, in my mind, did a very poor job of weaponizing his receivers. Christian Kirk was fine, but the problem was Calvin Ridley. He would run very static on-field routes most weeks, and then once in a while, now all of a sudden, a random week, they put him in these bunch formations, and all of a sudden he's wide open, and he gets his 2-touchdown game and his 100 yards. Next week, he's on the island again, running static downfield routes. Well, that was the whole season for Ridley. He's a good player, just a horrible situation. The wild card is, if Doug Peterson realizes they're all fired if they're bad this year, if Doug Peterson takes over the offense from Press Taylor, he is more cognizant of weaponizing receivers and would use them in a more diverse way. I do agree with Jeff, though, that Brian Thomas is risky, because those one-year wonder guys, it's often a man against boys, and that's why they ball out that last year. So that's risky. But if you hear catch wind at point that Doug Peterson's taking the offense over, it does, I think, raise the ship, especially the floor for Trevor Lawrence. That's the big one who would benefit from that.
So we're bearing the lead here. Beyond my revolutionary don't draft last year's best player theory, which I still think is great, Marcus comes up with these little gems in here, like the scoring system. And I also want to harken back to something we all love playing, Superflex. Marcus was the one who brought out, we're not creating a more level playing field, a game where the quarterback is more representative of his value. We're making a race for quarterbacks, right? It's not the playing field's not, the quarterbacks aren't represented at the level they are in the NFL. They're just scarcer.
All right, we got time for one more question. Who wants to be that? Oh, back in the back.
Hi guys, I'm in a league where the commissioner likes to promote kind of unique rules, and it's an IDP league, and this year in an effort to balance offensive and defensive scoring, to elevate the offense, he's pushed through a rule where we're getting bonus points now for first downs, and I would imagine this elevates third down backs and maybe slot receivers. I was wondering if there are maybe 1 or 2 guys that you guys can think of specifically that would get a big boost from this rule over maybe their ADP.
I'll start. I don't know off the top of my head who I would pick would get a boost in a points per first down league. What I will say is, when there's big scoring changes in your league or whatnot, I think a lot of times, you internalize that and you try to have some sort of way of predicting, what you're asking here. The bottom line is a lot of these things correlate very strongly to simply volume, right? And so I wouldn't. It's similar to like a 6 point per touchdown pass league, or actually a better example is going from like a half PPR league to a full PPR league, right? We look at the end season results and we see that, this guy in a half PPR league was 7 spots worse or better than he was in a full PPR league. But that's in hindsight. That's after things were done. When we're going and we're predicting things and projecting things, I can look at my projections right now and look at top 24 running backs and wide receivers. You're only going to see at most a 1 or 2 spot difference at those positions from a half PPR league to a full PPR league. That might be shocking to people, but when you're projecting, it's different than when you're looking at things in hindsight. So when you finish your league this year, you're going to say, oh wow, Jaleel McLaughlin ended up doing really well in this point per first down league, but how predictable was that? How predictable was that at the end of the day? Because I guarantee you that also correlates with Jaleel McLaughlin just simply playing a bigger role in his offense and seeing more volume than expected. So it's really just leaning in on the volume aspect more. Maybe there's the highly volatile guys who are lower target share producers and maybe a 3-catch but monster performance as volatile players like we were talking about earlier with like a Brian Thomas. Maybe those guys aren't as attractive because we know that volume will correlate to these first downs. So maybe just lean in on the volume projections a little bit more than you otherwise would.
That's 100% correct. So the last couple of years, as the league seems to become more volatile, especially early in the season, October is the new September. Things don't seem to normalize until into the season. I've been trying to come up there's got to be something that's going to make me look super smart. Like I'm ahead of the curve and I've got this all figured out. And I know we all like to find these little players and dig into the details and find the little narrow bands. The big band or the wider band is true, and it's exactly what JJ says. It's volume. Chasing volume at the right price is the plan for me. That's the path to fantasy success. Having the ball is the primordial sludge of fantasy points. They all arise from that. So that's what I'm focused on.
All right. Well, everyone, please give the Mount Rushmore of fantasy football a big round of applause. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. Thank you for all of your great insight. We'll be moving to the next panel, which is the Fantasy Football Advice Network's showing off their great system that they have. So, again, thanks to everybody, and thanks, guys, for being here.